Rome, in its early days, was a city both proud and restless. The kings of old had raised walls, drained marshes, and carved out temples to the gods. Yet beneath the stone and ceremony, fear lingered, for the throne had become a place of terror. At the heart of this terror stood Tarquinius Superbus, Rome's seventh and final king. His name, Superbus, meant the proud, but to the people it carried another meaning: arrogance, cruelty, and unchecked ambition. Unlike the kings before him, Tarquinius had not earned the throne to the will of the people or by noble inheritance. He had seized it in blood. His reign began with a murder, the assassination of King Servius Tullius, a ruler loved by many for his reforms and fairness. Tarquinius and his ambitious wife, Tullia, plotted Servius's downfall. Legend tells of the night when Tullia drove her chariot over her own father's lifeless body, the wheels stained with royal blood. From that moment on, Rome was bound in fear. Tarquinius ruled not as a father of his people, but as a tyrant. He ignored the Senate, silenced the voices of Rome's elders, and made decisions alone. Anyone who opposed him vanished. His rule was not one of persuasion, but of iron and cruelty. The people worked, bled, and bowed under the weight of his pride. Yet Rome was not enough for him. His hunger for power spread outward like fire, and his eyes fell upon the nearby city of Gabii. Gabii was strong, proud, and resistant to Rome's dominance. Its walls stood tall, its people were stubborn, and unlike other towns, it refused to yield to Tarquinius's threats. For the king, Gabii became more than a rival city. It became a challenge to his pride, a thorn that had to be crushed. But Tarquinius faced a problem. Gabii was well defended, its citizens cautious and alert. A direct assault would be costly, perhaps even impossible. He needed another way, and so the tyrant turned to deception. Enter Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son. If Tarquinius was cruel, Sextus was cunning. He understood the power of lies, the seduction of charm, and the art of playing the victim. Together, father and son devised a sinister plan, one that would not rely on soldiers and swords, but on treachery. Sextus would pretend to betray his father. He would flee Rome, acting as though he had been driven out by the tyrant's hand. He would arrive in Gabii not as an enemy, but as a desperate fugitive seeking shelter. In time, he would win their trust, climb into their leadership, and from within, tear the city apart. And so, the stage was set. One night, under a cloak of secrecy, Sextus fled Rome. He made his way to Gabii, his clothes torn, his face marked with false bruises, his eyes burning with feigned rage. At the gates, he demanded to be let in. "My father has cast me out," he cried. "Tarquinius trusts no one, not even his own blood. I have suffered under his hand, and I come to you, noble Gabans, seeking justice. Let me fight at your side against the tyrant who has wronged us all." The Gabans, ever watchful of Rome's cruelty, looked upon Sextus with suspicion. Was this truly the son of their enemy, broken and betrayed? Or was it a trick? Yet Sextus spoke with such passion, such conviction, that their doubts began to soften. He told stories of Tarquinius's harshness, of the suffocating rule in Rome, of his own supposed sufferings. Little by little, their walls of mistrust began to weaken. To prove his loyalty, Sextus offered to fight against his father's forces. And when Gabii launched raids on Roman lands, Sextus rode at the front. He led with courage, or what seemed like courage, and victory followed. Each success stitched him deeper into the hearts of the Gabans. Soon, whispers filled the city. Perhaps Sextus truly is one of us. Perhaps fate has sent him as a weapon against his own father. Suspicion turned to admiration. Admiration turned to trust. Trust turned to power. Months passed, and Sextus rose higher. He was invited into the councils of Gabii, his voice carrying weight in matters of war and peace. The people hailed him as a champion. Children followed him in the streets. Soldiers swore by his name. The trap was closing, and Gabii, though unaware, stood already on the edge of ruin. But Sextus was not yet satisfied. Winning trust was one thing. Destroying from within was another. He needed guidance from a master of cruelty himself, his father. And so, in secret, Sextus sent a messenger to Tarquinius, asking what he should do now that the Gabans had opened their gates to him. The king received the messenger in silence. Instead of speaking, he walked into his garden. He carried no words, no instructions, only a stick. With it, he struck at the tallest poppy heads, one by one, slicing them cleanly from their stems. The red flowers fell silently into the dirt. When he had finished, Tarquinius dismissed the messenger without explanation. The messenger returned to Sextus, confused, carrying no letter, no spoken order, only the memory of a king striking down flowers. But to Sextus, the meaning was clear. His father was not speaking of flowers. He was speaking of leaders. The message was simple, chilling, and final. Cut down the great men of Gabii, one by one, until none remain. And so, Sextus began his work. At first, it was subtle. He whispered doubts about one commander, hinted at betrayal by another. A respected elder was accused of conspiring with Rome. A general was framed for treachery. One by one, Gabii's strongest leaders fell, executed or exiled, their reputations ruined by lies. The people hardly noticed at first. Sextus still fought bravely at their side. He still spoke with fire against Rome. But beneath the surface, Gabii was rotting. Its leaders were gone, its guardians silenced. By the time the city realized what had happened, it was too late. Gabii had been gutted from within. Now, Sextus waited, biding his time, ready to deliver the city whole into his father's hands. The trap had been sprung, and the jaws were closing fast. Gabii had trusted the wrong man. While Sextus Tarquinius smiled in their streets and feigned loyalty in their councils, he carried only his father's hunger in his heart. The seeds of ruin had been planted the moment the city opened its gates to him. When the time was right, Sextus revealed his true hand. With the leaders gone, the army fractured, and the people divided, he opened the doors of Gabii to the Romans. There was no great battle, no desperate defense. Gabii did not fall with a clash of steel, but with the silence of betrayal. The city was delivered whole to Tarquinius Superbus, like a lamb bound for slaughter. The people of Gabii soon learned what it meant to live under the proud king. Their lands were seized, their wealth stolen, and their young men conscripted into Rome's endless works of labor. Walls rose, temples were built, but the price was blood and sweat wrung from the backs of the oppressed. The story of Gabii spread like a warning whispered in every corner of Latium. Resist Tarquinius, and you will be crushed. Trust him, and you will be destroyed. Yet Tarquinius's ambition reached even higher than the lands around Rome. His greatest pride, and perhaps his greatest crime, was the construction of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. This was to be the grandest temple Rome had ever seen, a monument to rival any in the ancient world. He forced thousands into labor, Romans and conquered peoples alike, their hands blistering, their bodies breaking under the weight of stone. Day after day, the people toiled under the sun, their sweat running like rivers into the soil of the Capitoline. This was no act of devotion to the gods. It was an act of arrogance, a temple not built for Jupiter's glory, but for Tarquinius's own. The king's name, not the gods, was the one whispered in curses beneath the cracking whips of overseers. And yet, Tarquinius's pride blinded him to danger. He believed fear would keep his throne secure. He believed cruelty was enough to silence rebellion. But what he could not see was a storm gathering just beyond his reach. For the seeds of his destruction lay not only in his own arrogance, but in the arrogance of his sons. Among them, Sextus Tarquinius again played the darkest role. His betrayal of Gabii had shown the depth of his cunning, but it had not sated his desires. Where his father sought power over cities, Sextus sought power over people. He was reckless, lustful, and cruel, and it was this cruelty that would finally break the Tarquin dynasty forever. One night, Sextus rode from Rome to the home of Lucretia, a noble woman renowned for her beauty and virtue. She was the wife of Collatinus, a man loyal to Rome, and the daughter of Spurius Lucretius, a respected elder. Lucretia embodied everything Roman society prized: chastity, honor, and strength of character. To Sextus, she was not a woman to be respected, but a prize to be taken, a jewel to prove his power. The details of that night were whispered in fear for generations. Sextus entered her home under the guise of a guest. He carried not swords or soldiers, but deceit. When the house was quiet, when the candles had burned low, he crept to her chambers. What he did there was not the act of man, but of a predator cloaked in arrogance. By morning, Lucretia's life was shattered, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Rather than sink into silence, she summoned her father, her husband, and their allies. Pale and shaken, she spoke every detail of Sextus's crime. She named betrayal, the threat, the shame she bore. Her father wept, her husband raged, but Lucretia stood firm. She demanded vengeance. She demanded justice. And then, before their eyes, she took her own life. Her blood spilled not in weakness, but in defiance. Her body fell, but her act ignited a fire Rome had never known before. It was then that Lucius Junius Brutus, once dismissed as a fool, stepped forward. He lifted the bloody dagger from Lucretia's wound and swore an oath over her body. His voice thundered. No Tarquin would ever rule Rome again. By her blood, by her sacrifice, the tyranny of the Tarquins would end. The oath spread like wildfire. In the streets of Rome, the people gathered, carrying Lucretia's body as a banner of outrage. Her name, her story, her honor became the rallying cry of a revolution. Men who had once trembled at Tarquinius's name now raised their fists in fury. The Senate, long silenced, found its courage. The army, weary of the king's cruelty, turned away from him. The city boiled with rage. Tarquinius, hearing of the uprising, tried to rally his forces, but the spell of fear that had bound Rome was broken. His soldiers deserted him. His allies abandoned him. One by one, the pillars of his power crumbled. The proud king who had once ruled with terror now found himself fleeing the very city he had claimed as his own. He and his sons fled into exile, their power shattered, their arrogance repaid. Again and again, they tried to return, to reclaim the throne they believed was theirs by right. But the people of Rome had seen too much. They had tasted tyranny, and they would never again bow their necks to a king. In the aftermath of Tarquinius's fall, Rome stood at a crossroads. The monarchy was gone, but what would take its place? Would another king rise, clothed in fairer words but bound by the same chains of pride? Or would the people build something new, something stronger than a single man's will? The answer came in the form of the Republic. No man would ever again be called king in Rome. Instead, power would be shared between consuls, elected by the people, their terms limited, their authority checked by the Senate. This system, imperfect yet revolutionary, was born from the ashes of Tarquinius's tyranny. It was a promise to the people. Never again would Rome bow to the arrogance of a single ruler. And at the heart of this revolution stood the memory of Lucretia. Her death was not forgotten. Her name was spoken in hushed reverence for generations, a reminder of the cost of unchecked power and of the courage that could rise from tragedy. Yet Tarquinius's story did not end with his exile. From afar, he watched Rome grow stronger without him. He plotted, schemed, and begged for allies to restore his crown. Time and again he tried to return, but each attempt failed. Rome had closed its gates to him forever. The king who had once ruled with pride and cruelty died a broken man, far from the city he had sought to make his own. His dynasty crumbled, his name cursed, and yet his shadow lingered. For centuries after, Romans would tell the tale of Tarquinius Superbus as a warning. Beware the arrogance of kings, for tyranny always sows the seeds of its own destruction. But let us pause here and reflect. What makes this story endure across the ages? Why does the name Tarquinius Superbus still echo when so many other kings have been forgotten? It is because his reign teaches us something timeless. Power without restraint becomes poison. Arrogance without justice becomes tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how strong, always collapses under its own weight. In America, we often celebrate our independence, our resistance to kings and tyrants. The Romans, thousands of years before, learned that same bitter lesson. They too rose against oppression. They too declared that no man, however proud, would ever again call himself their king. The fall of Tarquinius was not just Rome's story. It is a story for every people who have ever stood against oppression, who have ever demanded freedom. It is a story of courage born from tragedy, of a woman's sacrifice that ignited a revolution, of a city that chose liberty over fear. Rome became free, and from that freedom grew an empire that would shape the world. But it all began here, with a tyrant's arrogance, a woman's courage, and a people's roar for justice.